that's also one, liquidation, where you force the company into liquidation. So you dissolve the company and distribute the assets.
Forcing someone to sell their shares, or can you force someone to sell their shares? This is a power move in the business world that we're going to talk about today. And we have the business lawyer here with us, Kat.
Hello.
And she's going to describe to us 9 different situations when these things can happen. So, Kat, where do we start? I mean, it sounds very intense to force someone to sell their shares.
Absolutely, and it can often be a reality that you do not agree, or that you're in some form of conflict or a financial jam. And the baseline that's good to know, always this is not legal advice, it's general information. The baseline for you to know is that your shares are your property. So you cannot go around and force somebody to sell their shares, even if you're shareholders in the same company, unless you have some substance, a legal ground, something in the contract that says you have the right. So baseline is, if somebody just tries to push you out and force you, you can ask, why? What's the ground? What's the basis? I want to remain in this company. I do not want to sell. So remember, why? What are they after? Do they have a right to try to force you to sell? And the other way around, if you want somebody out, or if you're looking to get paid from somebody, can you force them to sell their shares? So 9 different ways.
9 different ways. Let's start.
Yeah. Number 1, breach of the shareholders agreement.
Okay, and what is that?
Well, basically, if you're in a company that is a privately held company, you will most likely have signed a shareholders agreement. And 99% of the time, such an agreement, I don't have the exact figures, that agreement will contain a clause that says that if you commit a material breach, you need to sell your shares back either to the other shareholders or to the company. And typically that will be to a heavy discount in comparison to the market value of the shares. So that would be kind of a penalty for somebody committing a material breach.
Okay.
And important is, what is a material breach? Because, imagine that you have in the agreement that you need to inform me if you change your address. You need to update that, and you forget. Should you be able to lose all of your shares, having to sell them back?
No.
So that's a breach, but it's not a material breach. So try to be kind of clear in your contract what should constitute a material breach. Typically, we're talking about non-compete, confidentiality, trade secrets, transfer restrictions, heavy issues, heavy things that you cannot amend within a short time period. That really does hurt the company.
Okay, that was number 1.
Number 1.
Number 2.
Number 2, that will be if you have a vesting agreement and you have unvested shares and you leave the company. You do not stay on. So even if the shares are your own, you own them on paper, you have to sell them back, typically basically for free, if they are unvested, if you leave early. And vested, that is that you have to stay on for, say, 3 or 5 years and earn the shares. So if you leave prior, and it can even be a clawback that says that even if you earn them, if you do something really bad, like go to a competitors, we have a right to take them back. Okay. So that's also when you can force someone to sell their shares.
Okay. Number 3 then.
Number 3, that can be a mechanism if you and I, even no matter if we're private individuals or big commercial companies, we go into a joint venture and we decide that there is a risk that our cooperation will not work out, then we can have a so-called shotgun provision.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Sounds intense.
It is. It's very intense. Because it's not really a way for you to force me to sell my shares. It's a way to to push me to decide if I want to sell my shares to you or buy your shares.
Okay, what did you call it? Shotgun?
Shotgun provision or shotgun clause. So that is basically a form of, you remember when you were a kid?
Yeah.
And you had that, if I cut the pie, you get to choose the piece. So it's really fair. It's the same. So if you want to trigger the shotgun provision, you set the price per share. So if you say 100, I want to trigger the shotgun provision, I say the value of our shares, both yours and mine, is 100, then I get to think and decide if I want to sell my shares for 100 to you, or if I want to demand that you buy my shares for 100. So if you trigger it, make sure you do a fair valuation, because you do not know if you're the buyer or the seller at that point. And also make sure that you're good for it. Because if you have to buy my shares, you need to have the economy for it. And that, of course, goes also with the number 1, with the shareholders agreement. If there's a breach of contract and I need to sell my shares to you, you need to be able to pay for them, even if it's a discount. So that's always an issue. But in the shotgun provision, where you have no discount, it becomes even more obvious that you cannot use it if you don't have sufficient finance for it.
Okay, so the shotgun provision.
Number 3.
That was number 3. So if we're heading over to number 4, what's happening?
Now we're going to look at the general call option, because many of these are kind of options. But a general call option, that is, if I offer you an option that you can, for 10 kroners today, you get the option to buy my shares at a specific point in time in the future for a predetermined price. So it's like a warrant, but instead of being a relationship with you and the company, it's between you and I, private persons. So I can say that you can buy my shares in 3 years for 150. And then after 3 years, even if the value of the shares is 300, then you can come and force me to sell my shares to you for 150, because you have a call option.
Oh, wow, call option.
Call option.
I'm going to remember that. Number 5 then.
Number 5, well, that is that in many startups, in particular if you have VC, venture capital investors, or other more experienced, savvy investors, and your plan is to make an exit, to sell the company to a profit in the future, then they will want in the agreement an exit trigger. And that is a right that if the company has not done an exit, that is being sold, or done an IPO, gone to the stock market within, say, 5 to 6 years, then I get to pull the exit trigger, which means that the company has to engage an investment bank and start to look for a way to make an exit, start to seek to make an IPO, or start to seek to make an M&A deal that is getting sold on the private market. And you can also have an exit committee where the majority get to decide if you're going to do that identified exit, and the minority is forced to just tag along. And also you as a founder will be forced to just tag along if somebody pulls the exit trigger, because nothing has happened with the company for a sufficiently long period of time, like 5 years.
So exit trigger. Number 6.
Well, that is quasi forcing somebody to sell. That is if you have a liquidation right.
Which is?
Which is a right to trigger that the company stops all of its operations and sells all of its assets. So technically, you do not demand that somebody sells the shares, the ownership. Instead, the company is dissolved. So you sell all of the assets and distribute the money you get to the owners. So the shares will be worthless. So that's also one, liquidation, where you force the company into liquidation. So you dissolve the company and distribute the assets. So that's a way of forcing the shares to become kind of worthless, at least.
Oh, okay. Number 7 then.
Number 7. Well, then we have if you have pledged your shares or if you go bankrupt, then a third party can come in and say that you have to sell your shares to cover your debt. Because a pledge, that is, let's say that you're buying a house and you don't have enough money to buy the house. Then you go to a bank and take a loan and they say, well, if you give me, if you pledge all of these beautiful shares you have in that company, I will get you a better interest because I have more security for the loan. And then you're not able to pay your mortgages. Well, then the bank can say, well, now we're going to enforce that pledge. So we're going to force you to sell it, or we're going to sell it for you on an auction. And we're going to take the money and we're going to pay, you're going to pay us what you owe us. So that's also a way that you're forced to sell your shares. And also if you go bankrupt, then the administrator will want to sell all of your assets, of course. So that's also one way where this can happen.
So if you're heading over to number 8.
Number 8. Well, that is a squeeze out. So most jurisdictions will actually, under law, have a right for the majority to, under certain circumstances, buy out the minority. So that's really good to know. Because typically there's thresholds, such as you needing to hold more than 90% of the company to squeeze me out. So it's good to know if you want to play the field to make sure that you are either safe, you have more than 10%, so you know you cannot get squeezed out, or if you're the majority holder, know you can use the squeeze out. And typically, since it's under law, it will be safeguarding mechanisms also for the minority, ensuring that you get a fair treatment during the process, and most importantly, that you get a fair price. The valuation of the shares is, of course, immensely important in such cases.
Number 9, the last one.
The last one, and that's actually back to the shareholders agreement. That is, and we touched upon it when we talked about the exit trigger, that's the drag along. So typically in the shareholders agreement, and we have an episode digging into this, giving the examples why it's so important, but it says that if you have a buyer interested in buying the whole company, and the majority wants to sell to that buyer, then they can force the minority to come along. They can drag the minority along to the same price and the same terms and conditions. So they can force the minority to sell at the same terms and conditions.
Wow. And that's if you're the majority shareholder. Okay.
You can drag along.
Wow, it's so informative. I mean, it's a lot, 9 different situations that you can use this when the shares can be forced to be sold or
it's good to reflect and also nuances. Nuance it in relation to the situations where you cannot be forced to sell your shares, because that can also be a lot of pressure when somebody tries to force you to sell your shares.
Yeah, and it's very important to know what kind of situation it can be.
Indeed.
Really good. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you.
So this is not legal advice, it's knowledge sharing. That's what we're doing in the Business Law Toolbox for you to have knowledge at zero cost about business law.
And also, if you have other examples where you have been able to force somebody out, forced somebody to sell their shares, or somebody's forced you to sell their shares, we would love to hear about it.
Yes, tell us your stories. That would be so fun to read.
Love it.
And talk about your business, tell us what you're doing, and drop questions down below so maybe we can answer it in an episode.
Indeed.
And also do not forget to subscribe and like our channel and spread the word to your startup and entrepreneur friends, because this is going to keep on going. Sharing the knowledge together is the most fun part.
It is. It really is. And it's important. This can really help you grow.
Yes. So rock on with your businesses. And if you haven't started one yet or want to, I believe in you. This is going to be really good. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Hej då.
Hej då.